Good afternoon. I'm John Rasan from CoMotion, and this is a session on one of my favorite topics, which is hydrogen. And delighted to have Michael Galvin, Director of Waterfront and Commercial Real Estate for the Port of LA, the massive port that belongs to the city of Los Angeles, and is, I guess, the largest port in the country. And our friend Elise Zoli from Wilson Sonsini, who's the Energy and Climate Solutions Partner at Wilson Sonsini. And for anybody who doesn't know who Wilson Sonsini is, shame on you. They're a large, very, very large law firm that is really the law firm of Silicon Valley and the law firm behind so much of the innovation economy, I would put it that way. So hydrogen. So I thought hydrogen everywhere, but you can't find that goddamn stuff, if you pardon my French. And for any owners of Toyota Mirais, which is the car that one of the only two commercially available hydrogen cars in the United States, it's hard to get to find a hydrogen to put in your tank these days. But anyway, a month ago, as many of you might know, the Biden administration announced a $7 billion program to finance 7 national hydrogen hubs. One of them is here in California, the California Hydrogen Hub, and we'll talk about that. It's in some ways a game changer. I would ask a provocative question. I don't really believe in my own question. But why do we need hydrogen hubs in the first place? Why do we need government support for this industry? And why can't, for example, the hidden hand of the market just work its wonderful, mysterious ways and lead us towards the hydrogen economy? So, Michael, maybe I'll start with you.
I think we need hydrogen hubs to create visibility, really. It's important right now to get people talking about these issues, and it has. I think the discussion about the hubs started a variety of different people in our industry and other industries that are more focused on delivery of the product to us, but people that are looking for zero-emission alternatives to battery electric to start having conversations about how we can use hydrogen in that way. And those conversations started happening about 2.5 years ago when the legislation enacted the hub. And so it has helped in getting the conversation going. As far as the dollar amount, it's actually a relatively small dollar amount, whether you look at it in relationship to the amount of money it's going to take for the ports to decarbonize and to become zero emissions, which is in the $30 to $40 billion range, or the amount of money it's going to take to build out the hydrogen hub in just Southern California, which is probably in that range or above. It's a small dollar amount, but it gets the conversation going. It gets people together to solve a variety of issues that are already confronting us right now as we introduce this new technology into the marketplace, which includes all kinds of permitting issues related to how you're going to store, transport, and put hydrogen into vehicles in a variety of locations, although it's okay to go take your Mirai and fuel up at a gas station that has no security control around it. We're going through issues right now on being able to bring hydrogen into a very secure container terminal and be able to put it into 2 or 3 vehicles at a time, because that's not addressed as far as the scale and amount of hydrogen that's going into one vehicle in the current fire code. So the hydrogen hubs are allowing us to have these conversations, and the funding puts a lot of push behind finding solutions to those relatively small problems that we need to resolve to get enough equipment out there to start to build scale of the demand side, and then allow the rest of the market to follow in, the hidden hand to come in and start to produce the molecules at a reasonable price.
Right. Lisa, I want to get to you in a second, but the goal of the hydrogen hubs, basically, all of this activity is to reduce the cost of hydrogen. It's currently too high. The market cost is too high relative to gasoline or other energy equivalents.
That is the goal, but whether or not that dollar amount is going to get you there, I think I would argue that it's not. I also would argue that depending on where you put that money, that there's different ways that you can subsidize the market. On our end, it's really important that that money comes in, because the people that are testing out this equipment at the ports, it's all cost to them. They do not make any money. They lose money on having to go through this process of getting to zero emissions because they're trying out all this technology that's nascent, doesn't have a place in the marketplace. There is no commercialized equipment quite yet, but we're pushing and pushing to get them to two milestones, 2030 on our terminals and 2035 off our terminals. So to get them there, they need to mitigate their risk. They need this money so that we can push technology and get the commercial providers to get to this level of commercialization that's necessary to bring down the cost of the equipment. When you have that demand, then eventually you will bring down the cost of the molecules with scale. So that's why it's important, is because it allows for that beginning piece of demand to start creating a marketplace where production will chase it and then bring the overall cost down.
Now, Elise, you've long been my...
Could I just
Go ahead.
say three things, because I think it's really important. My job is to move money to the innovation sector, and the hubs represent three fundamental values that if you haven't thought of them this way, I'm going to encourage you to think about them this way. The first is that the best science that we have is that clusters improve efficiency, improve innovation, and produce better results faster. And so the hub part of this is an important consideration. The second is that DOE-funded projects outperform their peers. They fail less, they succeed better, and they have a slug of non-dilutive capital. And that is equally important on a competitive basis, and that's why folks come to these hubs. That's why, I'm very fortunate, my team and I. We've got some folks in the room. Bob is in the corner, and Tim Kobus is over here. And we spend a lot of time thinking about these applications as strategic plays for the sector. And I want you all, my free advice is that you all should think of them that way as well. And thirdly, I want to echo what Michael said, but I want to do it in really crystal clear terms. The private capital that came into the hubs is already in excess of $50 billion on a nationwide basis. These hubs created that market that is, compared to the $7 billion, we already have a national market that we didn't have before. And so it's not merely the bringing people together, it's not merely improving the US economy and prosperity and the likelihood to be globally competitive. And I know you know that at NEOM. It is also the fact that by putting those applications out on the street, we already drove the market in a way that we haven't been able to do since the hydrogen economy was first launched in 2005. So there's a lot of reason to be proud of what's happened, to pay attention, and to continue to watch this market get larger.
Thanks, Elise. I mean, you've long been my go-to person for hydrogen, and so much so that CoMotion was instrumental in launching a nonprofit institution in Europe, the Monaco Hydrogen Alliance, 3 years ago, which looks specifically at renewable hydrogen and mobility. NEOM has been a very big supporter, among others, and you serve as an advisor, so that's really, really great. But walk us through pragmatically, what is a hydrogen hub? I mean, it brings, cluster brings together companies, academic institutions, ports, et cetera. How does it work, actually? I mean, you've been in the trenches, Elise, and several, so maybe let Elise...
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, like all major government awards, there's a contract at the center. That contract goes to a joint venture. That joint venture can be unincorporated or incorporated, but in most of the hubs, it's either a group of states and governments, and Michael's a really important plays an anchoring role in the Arches hub, or it's a consortium of leading corporations, like in the High Velocity Hub, where the press is very clear, and it's a big team, and it's a team I'm really proud of. Chevron, Exxon, Sempra, and quite a few others who are coming together and saying, we want the most innovative companies to be here to advance large projects that give those innovative companies the ability to shine. make a difference and produce a commercial product with off-takers. So think of hubs as very large, high-quality, innovation-based industrial parks, typically at least $10 billion in large-scale industrial park. And what we customarily do is all of the work to be able to move the capital to make them happen, and to make sure that the innovation sector has a role to play there.
And Michael, how will we gauge success for the Arches is the name of the California hub? I mean, 3 to 5 years. What are the metrics that we're going to be looking at?
So for us, we'd be looking at large-scale deployment of hydrogen equipment within the port area. So that's container handling equipment. We have about 4,000 pieces of equipment between the two ports, LA and Long Beach, which make up the busiest port complex, both individually as 1 and 2 and collectively in the Western Hemisphere. For us, it's getting a significant amount of that equipment turned over into hydrogen equipment. So if in 5 years, we were able to displace 20% of that equipment with hydrogen equipment, I think we have gone a long way to start to build the market for that, and showing that we can do that in a very resilient format, meaning that that's a promise in hydrogen for us really, is to be able to continue to do what we do with the strong labor force that we have today without totally changing the way we operate today. And so that would be success for us if we could see a large percentage of that turnover in that time frame, and at the same time see the 20,000 drayage trucks that we have see a large percentage, 20% of those turnover as well. The real market demand piece is in the drayage and the long range trucking. That's where the largest piece of the market is. The port is a mover and a precedent maker in the environment, and so it's important that we change over our equipment, and it's important for the communities that we live in and work in that they get better air. But it's a really small piece of the demand market to build up that scale that's necessary to allow economics to take over here and allow the molecules cost to be the driver for why people want to change over. But important first piece. Second piece is much more important. The drayage and long-range trucking piece for on-road trucks is the really large piece that will really get this market moving.
Right. That I understand. Elise, the Europeans in particular have been up in arms over the last couple of years about this sort of great sucking sound of American government subsidies going into, Buy America, American industry supporting the heartland, et cetera, and they feel they're getting shut out. Is this going to be an issue with the $7 billion of government funds for the hydrogen hubs, do you think?
So yes and no, and I ordinarily would give you one digital answer, but the United States welcomes European and other companies that are leaders in the space and willing to make a commitment to the United States, but they want to see that commitment to manufacturing here in the United States and to being a presence. I think of that as routine trade behavior, and so that's the no part of it. That process, I think we would all agree. I do think there's something different about hydrogen. So the United States is the origin species for hydrogen innovation. It's a NASA technology. It's gone to the moon a number of times. It powers virtually anything you've ever seen in space.
Indeed, modern fuel cells were an outgrowth of the Apollo space program, I believe.
That's exactly right, Gemini and Apollo. And
Gemini,
so there's a real belief that losing this sector would be tantamount to being un-American. And so you're going to see a little more toothiness around hydrogen. And I just want to say, we talk about the Mirai and PEMs, that first generation of really important fuel cells matters, but when you talk about long-haul trucking, and to lean into the nerd that I am, solid oxide fuel cells, low temperature solid oxide fuel cells can burn hydrogen here where you have the fueling stations, and they're multi-fuel burners, so if they're taking the load to Canada, they'll burn whatever's in Canada. It can be vegetable oil or diesel. and they'll do it efficiently. And so to not really understand how the current generation of SOFCs, solid oxide fuel cells, are really the future of hydrogen, I think, is to miss some of the forest for the trees around the molecule alone. And I know Michael would say this, but when he talks about drayage, the existing $4 trillion in US diesel infrastructure can be repurposed to move hydrogen. And we probably shouldn't squander that infrastructure without darn good reason. And so I think that part of what you see with hydrogen is a series of extraordinarily high quality efficiencies that are going to change the way we move goods. And I think that's the part that the hubs really have the scale to be able to do, to produce the equipment, including the drayage equipment, to produce the long-haul trucks. I know, was anybody here last year? The Kenilworth Toyota truck was here. It has an SOFC APU. It is a magnificent machine. And just to be able to see, 1 million miles on it, absolutely glorious. And when you talk to the guys who drive, and I'm from a construction family, my family built roads, and the guys men and women get knocked to hell in a truck. If you've never driven a truck, it's like flying a small craft. It's a lot of bounce for the forward momentum. And when you have the fuel cells, the electric drivetrain, all of a sudden you fundamentally alter the driver's experience. And both the sound, the driver's experience, the emissions that are going to be in major industrial centers is non-trivial benefits that are benefits to the disadvantaged, the low-income and disadvantaged communities that tend to surround these places. They're benefits to the way we enjoy the outdoor space, and they're benefits to what we see and hear around us. And so, I'll make a plug every day for hubs because my experience is they work, but I think it's also important to see the long-term vision and understand where the benefits are.
In terms of long-term vision, how much of a bipartisan consensus is there in this country on hydrogen? And is there any danger, for example, if the Republicans win back the White House and Congress in a year and a bit, we have a Republican Party that's very gung-ho on the oil and gas industry. Would you anticipate any clawing back of the funds earmarked for the hubs? Or is that there's no way legally that's possible?
Quick change of microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Michael, do you want to
Thank you.
answer
Hello.
that?
I have a different slant on that, and it's in regards to the color system of hydrogen today and the politics around that, and concern about that, where we have an extreme concern in a patchwork of places in California right now in regards to what type of hydrogen we should be using at any given time, when the reality is you can't find any hydrogen below $30 a kilogram, right, which is sort of crazy. And then we're implementing, well, no, you can only use this type of hydrogen in a specific place. And a lot of that is related to politics and a misunderstanding of the marketplace that exists today. So I think it is extremely important that we get political support at a high level to regulate the industry, similar to how the energy grid is regulated right now in California. So there is consistency in that approach, because you cannot hold hydrogen politically at this point to a standard that is well below what the electrical grid is held to right now. And so these things need to match up, and I think that the political parties generally need to get together to get us to that place nationally, or at the state level first, but either way, we need to get to that point. I don't know what's going to happen if things shift one way or the other. I think there's a place for all feedstocks right now, because we need to get inexpensive hydrogen into the system. What I tell people all the time is, let's figure out how to get it into the equipment and into the trucks first, and stop emitting emissions out those trucks to benefit the users, the community, et cetera. And then let's worrying about greening up the feedstock after that. But if you try to do it the opposite way, we're going to kill the market before it even starts.
Elise, what's your take?
So Michael is my political guru, and any of you who know me, and I see a lot of familiar faces, you know I'm not a political being, I'm a technical being, but I'm a fusion and fission girl, right? For 20 years, I've done as much of the nation's fusion and fission as you can do. And I think it's calling that pink is a distortion of every scientific and reality principle we have. And so practically speaking, I think most of us would like to see renewable and nuclear-based hydrogen as low emissions as you can possibly see. I think most of us would like to get rid of the color scale and the
Absolutely,
politicking around it. And my overwhelming sense is that this is a debate that a few politicians have, and most of America long ago decided was not the main event, which is addressing the climate crisis. And so, you know, my view is we're going to keep forging ahead, and the 7 hubs represent 7 different regional values and
industrial focuses too.
expressions.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there's almost no chance you take away the big money. Would there be maybe a shift in the value around blue hydrogen in a Republican administration? Maybe. But, you know, PNNL, the Pacific Northwest hub, is large-scale hydro-backed. And there's a lot of folks that don't think large-scale hydro qualifies as renewable. So there's way too much infighting, and I think, you know, if we could have a bigger tent and do exactly what Michael suggests, which is focus on the molecules, focus on getting the equipment that can use the molecules efficiently and move the infrastructure a great leap forward, we're all going to be happier for it.
Right. Going to ask a few questions from the crowd, so if you have any things would you like to ask, perhaps start with you. Can we have a mic?
Do you want mine? And I'll yell.
No, we have one.
Come on.
For this very purpose.
I want to hear what you have to say. Michael?
Thank you. So I have a question about, I guess, specific to ports. So at least you mentioned repurposing some of the existing infrastructure. And then, Michael, I'm wondering at the port, you know, I know that on the electric landscape, you have companies like Zeem Solutions and Watt EV putting in hubs for charging drayage trucks and long haul. When you're looking at hydrogen infrastructure, I'm guessing it will be both, but looking at the mix of interests of who owns assets, who controls them in those kind of high traffic areas, how are you looking at prioritizing and working with those different parties to have electric infrastructure, hydrogen, and the timing and rollout of things like that?
So the ports are technology agnostic, so we're chasing all technologies that can get us to zero emissions. And of those 4,000 pieces of equipment, the majority of them are not heavy duty. It's medium to light duty, and so there's a place where battery electric makes a lot more sense, and the duty cycles are not as demanding or variable. So we're definitely focused on that as a solution. We're working with the LADWP to drop in about $300 million of infrastructure to our terminals now to make sure that they're ready to get to minimally where they need to be on the electrical side. On the hydrogen side, we see great promise in the heavy duty side of that because the durability of it, we have pieces of equipment that need to run 20 hours a day, but if they're doing 20 hours of one thing versus another thing, the duty load is twice as much. And so it needs to be extremely durable and predictable, and we can't have situations right now, technology-wise, battery electric just cannot provide what we need there, not to mention the charging infrastructure that would be needed for all that as well. That would be a whole retooling of the way we do things. And so we see that promise there, but we're focused on providing both opportunities and seeing what technology takes off, what technology can be produced cheaper on a commercial scale, what technology is retrofittable as well is really important because we want to put these pieces of diesel equipment out of use. And so if we're just replacing, that equipment's going somewhere else, downscale to a different port that's lesser regulated than we are. It could be in another country, it could be in this country because how we deal with the environment at different ports, even within California, is different. So it's important for us to find those retrofit opportunities because we are decommissioning diesel equipment, and it's much cheaper to do. And we're finding that we can do that at a rate now on a prototype level that is cheaper than buying a new piece of heavy-duty top handler equipment, which is basically a very large forklift. So that's where we're open to all, but we definitely see promise in hydrogen on the heavy duty, and that goes for trucks too. It's very hard to haul cargo and a battery, and that's what we always say. So on the hydrogen side, it provides a much different promise. But in all those cases, this is important to understand. The ports don't own equipment. We are landlord port. We own land, and we lease it out to terminals, and those terminals have truckers calling on them, and the trucks do have concession agreements with us that we can regulate how they come into the port and what type of equipment they use. But in the end of the day, all of those entities need to be able to buy this equipment at a reasonable rate. And so that's important, and the cost of whatever energy source is going in is important as well. And that's why the hubs are important, because it allows the port to exercise its convening power, to bring all these voices to the table to figure out how do we get all the pieces together? How do we get large-scale storage in the desert somewhere to work with a large-scale pipeline, to bring it into the system now and to allow it to distribute around? We see hydrogen able to act, as we just heard, as a drop-in for diesel. And that's from an infrastructure perspective too, and operational. We don't have to change the way we do things. We don't need large-scale storage down at the ports to be able to fuel. We can do it the way we do it today. A tube truck can go pick up that hydrogen at a local fueling depot and can bring it down to the ports. And so all of that can work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel in very significant ways that will help us get there faster.
It's not only trucks and drayage, but it's also, I guess, the obligation that ports and cities will impose on tankers and ships to use port power and renewable port power, which then will, presumably, hydrogen will have a role in that, no?
It will to some degree. I'll just jump in real quick and I'll pass over to you. Right now, we have a very significant electrical grid in the city of Los Angeles. The city of Long Beach does not have the same opportunity because they use Southern California Edison, and so the ability to get energy down to our facilities is much different on both sides. Where we have infrastructure and power close by, we just need to drop it in. Their power is far away, and that's even a longer-term project to get it down there. So where does hydrogen play a role there? To be able to continue to plug in the ships by putting a 1.5 megawatt fuel cell up and being able to plug in a ship and take load off of the grid that way. So that's an opportunity. We may not need that in the city of LA. Port of Long Beach may need it. We all share the same environment in the same community, so it's all about figuring out ways to take load off where you can and provide that power in a different place. And on the shipping side, we're really in the beginning stages of figuring out what those fuels of the future are going to be, but hydrogen derivatives are definitely going to play a role there, and a much, much larger potential opportunity to build out demand and to bring that production of those molecules back to the United States where they don't exist today, because most of the shipping fuels are actually purchased outside of the United States.
Yeah, I want to hand the microphone first to David Abel, my friend, the head of Verde Exchange. David.
Well, first, John, and CoMotion, I want to commend this panel. It's one of the best I've ever been to, so
Thank you.
that's at least my perspective. But secondly, I'd like to learn about the other 6 hubs. Just to give us a sample of, we're blessed with Michael and here in LA, but tell us a little bit about what the promise is of the other 6.
It's such a great question, and I want to answer it directly. I also want to say that I think the one thing that we did wrong, if we could go back and recreate the universe, as important as that Toyota Mirai is, and if anybody's ever driven a Mirai, it's a great ride, but I think we got lost in the passenger vehicle competition with electric vehicles, and it's the same drivetrain, but I would have much preferred, if I had been supreme dictator, to have started with the heavy equipment. It's really where we belong with hydrogen and also electricity production. So some of the southern based and Midwestern hubs are really focused on electricity production, and they're going to blend in hydrogen. They're going to keep their baseload power. They don't really have a solar strategy, and in some cases they don't have a great wind future. They don't have large-scale hydro. They're facing droughts, and the blending hydrogen, starting at 20% and moving to 70% in 3 years and 100% in 10 years, is their plan for reducing fossil usage and maintaining that equipment. that currently exists today with new burners. On the west, you're really seeing renewable based electrolysis and that focus on green hydrogen. In the Gulf Coast, you're tending to see the large-scale infrastructure for moving hydrogen, and particularly a focus not only on how you manage the molecule, but I think we're going to see some liquid organic hydrogen carriers and some really interesting work there. In Pennsylvania, you're seeing a more traditional blue hydrogen focus, and it's not what I do, but I do think that they really believe that pairing carbon capture and sequestration with some blended hydrogen is a future that we should look at, and it is a high quality interim step. And then, I think that there are quite a few university-led initiatives that are really about process, great leaps forward in TRL levels, and process and equipment and component manufacturing in a way that we don't have today. And I think all of those are as valuable. So there is good diversity, and I believe DOE believes, and I certainly believe, that by picking 7 hubs as opposed to 50 state-based hubs, that you're achieving the cluster value and are more likely to make better leaps forward that allow cross-hub collaboration, technology sharing, and I would say a cost reduction with the 45, with some of the tax credits that also apply here that get us to that $1 per kilogram on schedule, which is ideally in a decade.
Good. Maybe one more question, sir.
Thank you. So yesterday in one of the workshops, we were speaking with a gentleman who works at the Ontario airport, and they were projecting that their electrical requirements were going to increase perhaps threefold in coming years for new electric airplanes as well as ground equipment. And we were theorizing, would it make sense to bring in hydrogen to be able to, store power, generate power, directly load into vehicles? So there's discussion of bringing hydrogen to seaports. I'm curious about airports.
I'll let one of you guys answer that question. I think the answer is yes, by the way, but.
So there are a number, at least a dozen great ongoing hydrogen-based flight innovation companies out there. I'm going to encourage you just to Google them, and you will see some incredibly long-range vehicles that are performing really almost in a way that's indistinguishable from the current aircraft. The turbines also, this for the same reason that Mitsubishi's power and turbines can take a blended fuel. The aerospace-based turbines, the mobile turbines, can function very easily, and exactly what Michael said is the more likely, I believe, prediction, which is that anything that has a turbine, and we really want high quality security and long range, is going to go hydrogen over electricity, unless it's a small craft and only doing hop, skips, and jumps nearby.
And of course, airport operations also, I think hydrogen is just absolutely bound to play a big role, in terms of powering the airport and things like that. I could talk for hours on maybe, and I suppose as head of CoMotion, I could have an executive fiat that let's devote the afternoon to hydrogen, but we do have other panels. Elise, I want to thank you very, very much. I look forward to seeing you in Monaco at the end of this month, in a week and a half, for the Monaco Hydrogen Forum. It's going to be a great addition this year. Anybody who'd like to hop over to the pond, you're more than welcome. It's a truly interesting, fascinating event that brings together players from around Europe, around Asia, United States, the Middle East, to talk about how to use more hydrogen throughout the value chain of mobility. Michael, I wish you all the best in the port. We'll be looking at that, and thank you very much for taking the time out to come up here.
Thank you for the great questions.